It's 3 minutes after 10. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I have these little moments I remember when I first started doing this job. There is a sense or a temptation, if that's the right word, to forget that you're talking both about and to real people. Do you know what I mean by that? I forget that, whatever story it is that I might discuss, you might be living in the middle of it. You might actually be going through it. The nuances that it is sometimes tempting to ignore or avoid are going to be of enormous importance, possibly to you, and possibly not. But and equally, even if people are in the news and you start talking about them, you forget that you could be talking to them. That this notion of broad brushstrokes or deliberate provocation, which sadly seems to be enjoying a bit of a renaissance, doesn't it, in other corners of the British media? The outrageous things, the deliberately provocative things said to excite or to even incite seem to be making a bit of a comeback in this country after, I guess, America being ahead of the game or leading the way. And I always remember little moments. I tell you about them sometimes. I hope you find this interesting. If you don't worry. I'll only give a couple of minutes. I remember, for example, I used to be quite glib about pets and how people who loved their animals unduly were not to be trusted. I didn't really mean it, but it was kind of quite funny. Same about vegetarians. I write about this in my last book, How Not to Be Wrong. The Art of Changing Your Mind. But I changed my mind completely on the pets question when I just got a message from a widower telling me that if it hadn't been for his 2 dogs, then he doesn't think he would have made it after he lost his wife 6 months ago. And you read something like that and you think, oh, you are such a wazzock, mate, sometimes. Why would you have upset him? For no real reason. And yet, you know what the reason is. It's funny, we like to be a little bit out. We like to clutch our pearls sometimes. And some people are very good at walking that tightrope between causing offence and causing just like sort of lighting fireworks, if you like. And another one for me, when we were talking about young people being ill-prepared for work, and I was being a bit lazy, and I can't even remember whether I had children at the time. I've been doing this job for so long. But if I did have children, they'd have been way too young for them to have been in any way relevant to this issue. And a young woman rang in who, I think she was 16, 17, and she was absolutely gutted at what she'd just heard come out of her radio, because what she had heard coming out of her radio wasn't quite what I thought I had said, but you will know better than I do how that can sometimes be the case. But what she thought she had heard coming out of her radio was this wazzock in the studio with the big fluffy microphone in front of him, essentially coating her entire generation for being work shy and stupid, because employers were reporting that young people were ill prepared for work. This is going back probably more than 10 years. And I got her on. I think I may even have invited her into the studio. She was working in a local cinema. We were determined to get her some work in a field that she wanted to be in, because she was gutted that I was giving the impression that they weren't trying, that her generation were not somehow trying harder to get ahead. It's not a phrase I like, but you know what I mean. I think she wanted, guys, coming back to me now. She wanted to be a graphic designer, and she was kicking her heels working in a cinema, and she turns on her radio and hears someone saying the reason why these young people aren't getting better jobs is because they didn't work hard at. I can't remember what crud I was coming out with, but just, stick your flipping hand in the air. There'll be another bus along in a minute, and there'll be someone else coming out with exactly the same crud because they haven't been lucky enough to see the error of their ways or see the light. So I mention that for reasons that will soon become obvious, because we're returning to similar territory today, but we're returning to that territory from a very different angle, whereby children who are unprepared for work have been appallingly let down. Such a simple tweak, isn't it? Don't blame the children, blame the people charged with preparing them for work, which doesn't even mean the teachers in this case, because the teachers work within quite strict parameters, stricter parameters if some critics of Michael Gove are to be believed, and my instinct is that they are. working within the strictest parameters that the education system has known in a very long time. So we have these, what would you call them? Straitjackets, educational straitjackets within which teachers have to operate, delivering children who at the end of their educational journey are, according to 44% of employers now, not really ready for the workplace. And that's a heartbreaking betrayal of young people by probably politicians. And it's why Tony Blair wades back into the public space this morning with a call for GCSEs and A-levels to be scrapped. It's unfortunate timing, Tony. I mean, literally, the results arrive on Thursday, and if you've got these poor little treasures and various angels and urchins sitting there tearing open the metaphorical envelope to find out whether or not they've actually secured the results that they've been dreaming of, and you've got two old blokes in the background going, well, it's like Waldorf and Statler out of the Muppet Show going, well, I think they should abolish GCSEs anyway. It's not exactly perfect timing, but that is the timing with which we have to deal. It is today that Tony Blair has chosen to write an article in the Daily Telegraph, arguing that the modern qualifications do far too little to meet the needs of the modern world of work, which is why I am constructing a caveat the size of Middlesex. Nobody is blaming the children, the teenagers, the pupils, the students, or, until you explain to me otherwise, or indeed the teachers. It's the system. It's the examination system. It is the combination of GCSE, General Certificate of Secondary Education. Anybody? Is it? I don't know either. Yes, I'm looking at two members of the younger generation there. They haven't got a Scooby-Doo. And the A-level, the advanced level. That combination of GCSE and A-level is not preparing people for work. And there are two questions here, possibly three. One of which is that what you recognise as an employer? What is the problem? What is the evidence? What are the inadequacies or the examples of ill preparedness that bother you? Because the other question is this really a massive problem? I don't think that the education system should be geared exclusively to preparing young people for the workplace. Some of the most important and valuable lessons that you learn while doing your GCSEs and your A-levels are unlikely to be much use in many jobs. It depends what your job is. You know, if you're managing a petrol station at the moment, then some of the stuff that you learnt at school is unlikely to play much of a role in your professional life, but it might be playing a role in mine. So, you know, you're unlikely to start quoting poetry at the pumps, but I can drop a bit of poetry into my program, and it's a fruit of my education that I'm using at work. But it doesn't mean I enjoy poetry any more or less than you do in your private moments, in your quiet moments. Understanding things don't have to be commoditized. It doesn't have to have a monetary value attached to it. The power, the beauty. I was talking. Are you ready for an enormous name drop? I mean, you know who it is because you heard him on the programme yesterday, but I just caught myself there inhaling before uttering the sentence. I was talking to John Cleese about this yesterday, and John Cleese, who's a man in his 80s, remains absolutely dedicated to trying to understand things that he doesn't currently understand. I think if you ever grow out of that, you might as well sort of get your pipe and slippers out and stop engaging with the world around you. And the desire to understand things doesn't necessarily have a monetary value. You're not going to become a better actor or a better accountant or a better bus driver if you actually finally get your head around how capitalism operates or how Pythagoras' theorem applies. But it's nice to know stuff. It's nice to understand stuff. So how troubled should we be that a Department for Education survey showed that 44% of employers thought school leavers in England going directly into jobs were poorly prepared for work? How long does it take to turn them into someone who is ready for work? I don't know. I don't want to blunt my blade too much. I want to hear challenging and interesting contributions to this conversation. But the bottom line is it's a lot easier to set off fireworks now by saying, oh, young people. It's that Thucydides quote, isn't it, that I sometimes share with you. The quote about how the youth of today are this, that and the other. And you sort of think, yeah, absolutely. And then you realise he was writing it about 2,500 years ago. And you wonder possibly whether it's time to give your own head a wobble and have a look at the the more modern world. So I'd like to talk to employers. I mean, you've got enough on your plate at the moment, goodness knows, with shortage of staff and what have you, but employers from pretty much any sector. The young people presenting for work today, this generation, are they really as ill-prepared as Tony Blair suggests? Tony Blair is one of those Marmite politicians. His legacy is pretty impressive, but the shadow of Iraq is long and dark. Right-wing newspapers dedicated to pretending that they weren't all foursquare behind it, while the Tory party, in percentage terms, was more supportive of the Iraq war than the Labour Party was. But it is a millstone that has been hung around Tony Blair's neck to the exclusion often of all else. But on many other areas of policy, he was pretty impressive, but he is not infallible. He may have got this wrong. The Tony Blair Institute for Global Change may be barking up the wrong tree when it argues that schools overemphasize knowledge and memorizing information. But I don't know. You do know, because you're an employer and you know roughly what you're looking for in young candidates, young school leavers, and you know whether or not you're getting it. You know whether or not it is better or worse than it was 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 12 years ago, or 20 years ago when Tony Blair was Prime Minister. And I want you to tell me. 0345 6060 973. And then I'd also like to know where we think the line is. There's a terrifying mood abroad at the moment. There's talk of degrees that do not deliver measurable pay rises or measurable financial reward being diminished and demoted and denied to young people. I hate that. I really hate that. If I've got any passionate beliefs, like really deeply held, close to unshakable beliefs, apart from a belief in equality of opportunity and a fairer redistribution of wealth, it would be the liberating power of education, the way that finding a passion for books or maths or even lepidoptery just brings dimensions to your existence that cannot otherwise be dreamt of. And I hate almost always right-wing moves to close it down, because what it does is it denies the life of the mind to poorer people, and most pertinently poorer children. It reserves theatre or art or opera even, which I've never quite got my head around, but I hope to one day. It reserves these citadels for the already privileged and wealthy, and that really grinds my gears. So what should schools be preparing children for? What should schools be doing? I'm fascinated by that question of whether or not focusing too much on employment skills actually does more harm than good. Should we get the phone lines open? 16 minutes after 10 is the time. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Are school leavers really unfit for purpose to you as an employer? And you can be, just remember, I mean, maybe you want to be rude about the actual young people themselves. That's your prerogative and that's your choice. But I imagine that if there is a consensus on this sort of topic, then it's going to have more to do with a system than a generation, more to do with schooling than with ages of the schooled. But I don't know. I mean, it's all very well me having my views on this sort of thing. I don't have the experiences to back it up. You do, and I want to hear them. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And for the non-employers among us, for those of us who don't have skin in that particular part of the game, what about this growing sense that education is only valuable if it delivers wages, measurable monetary value at the end of the educational process? Do you share my misgivings about this? Do you, like me, worry about this particular direction of traffic? And how on earth do we stop it? How do we stop it? 0345 6060 973. Teachers, of course, as well, front of the queue. Teachers and employers, I guess, front of the queue. The rest of us coming at it from a slightly different angle, which is probably at the moment too vague to prompt you to pick up the phone. So I'll stick that back on the ring. I'll stick that back on a low simmer and return to it shortly. 20 minutes after 10 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. GCSEs and A-levels not fit for purpose, says Blair. 44% of employers think school leavers in England going directly into jobs are poorly prepared for work. It took me 20 minutes to ask you a question a minute ago, when really, I suppose all I'm asking is, what does that mean? What does that mean? How are they poorly prepared? Let's start with Adam, who's in Henley. Adam, what would you like to say?
Good morning.
Hello.
I've been involved in technology businesses for 4 decades and been involved in the hiring of hundreds of people with a bias towards those who are of a young age, just because of the industry. And we had graduate programs that specifically focused either on school or college graduates. And I think there's too much focus on information retention and regurgitation of facts in the current GCSE and A-level system, and not enough attention paid to how do you source credible sources of information, and how do you get information yourself and disseminate what is important and what isn't. Because we have great tools at our disposal, the internet, Google, other search engines, and they enable you to get facts quickly and efficiently.
Oh, well, they enable you to get what look like facts quickly and efficiently, don't they?
Which is my point.
I know it is, absolutely.
Yeah, and the other point I'd like to make about people who are hired...
Are you skiing at the moment? Are you skiing down a mountain at the moment?
No, that's the train just there.
Oh, okay, carry on.
Yeah, the other point I'd like to make about young people is it's more about attitude and aptitude than it is about what they know coming out of school. Because if you go into a specific sector, you are unlikely to have sector-specific knowledge that's useful on day one. Yeah,
so transferable skills, like as you say, I don't know what we'd file it under, sort of data not data management, but data processing sort of thing, like information, critical analysis, and then the softer skills, the personal skills is what you're talking about now, attitude and aptitude. Give me a broad and brief overview of that 40-year window on the retention and memorization of knowledge versus actual application of analytical skills, and then on the aptitude and attitude notions. Have things got better or worse? Is it a roller coaster? Has it gone up and down and up again and down again, or is it a gradient? What would you say?
I think it's a gradient, because I think...
And things have got gradually worse during that period of time, or better?
Well, I think they've got gradually worse, only because the school system stayed the same, but the demands of the modern work are changing and becoming more demanding, basically.
And on the attitude-aptitude front, I mean, I think, I don't know how much of my introduction you heard, but when I was a bit of an idiot as a younger man, I'd be talking now about sullen young people who don't meet your eye, make eye contact, and don't understand the importance of a firm handshake and all the sort of public school gibberish that I was inculcated with. But that's not a million miles away from what people sometimes mean when they talk about attitude and aptitude. Has that gone up or down in that 40 years?
I think that's gone up.
Good to hear it.
And I think there are some great... I mean, I don't want to use kids because people take that as derogatory, but there are some great young people with really impressive skills and really impressive drive.
Yes.
And that is way better than O-levels and A-levels or a degree.
And that may be part of what Tony Blair is talking about, that idea that we need to start perhaps placing more value on some of the things you've just described than we would upon a certificate that proves you're very good at memorising things. Although I stress again, for anyone just tuning in, this is not a criticism of any young people or any students. It's merely a question about the system and whether it's letting them down. Because if, as the Department of Education survey shows, 44% of employers, including Adam, think that school leavers in England are going directly into jobs poorly prepared for work, then the kids are being let down. And that is something that the grown-ups should be fixing. And I'm not as careful or as diplomatic as Adam is when it comes to using the word kids, but I will try not to. It's amazing how many times I get, they're not young goats. I'll get a text now saying, why are you calling them kids? They're not young goats. It's a word we've always used. Am I being anti-woke now when you tell me that I should change my vocabulary slightly to reflect? I don't know. We're getting onto that later. Tasha is in Norfolk. Tasha, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello.
I spoke to you last week. It's that politics teacher again.
How are you?
Having the same discussion as you. I'm very well. How are you?
Very well indeed. What's on your mind?
Also, Rishi Sunak uses the word kids all the time, by the way, in his leadership discussions.
Does it annoy you?
To let you know. Slightly, because I do pick my students up on it because I just like to be funny sometimes. I'm just a bit annoying, but I think it's fine personally.
Okay.
So I was thinking that there's so much content that the students need to get through and such little teaching time and so much pressures for teachers to get, obviously, the grades and the value added from our students with such little time. There's not a lot of time to be able to teach the other skills that students need after education. What I try to do is implement it within the lesson. So, for example, with politics, it leads well to lots of presentations.
Yeah.
Also, if the students are struggling and they haven't told me, then I can be quite hard on them. But if I did like they haven't done the homework and they haven't told me, I said, you need to communicate. If you have too much workload and you need some help, you need to have a discussion and actually voice what you need help with. Because when you're at work, if you don't do your work, you will just get fired. So I try to install that into them.
To give them an awareness of what might be needed in the workplace. What do you think unprepared means then, or poorly prepared means in this context? Looking perhaps not necessarily at your own direct pupils, but looking at the generations that you teach. When employers say that school leavers are going directly into jobs poorly prepared, what does that mean?
I think it's just I've been so focused on just passing exams, they don't have the skills because they've not had to use them or been taught them, or there's a lot as well. I have noticed this. I've been teaching for 7 years now. Right. Every year.
So you're much closer in age to the A-level students than you are to me.
Yes, thank you. Like
great.
that. Thanks,
fantastic. Carry on.
I do think that they get less and less problem-solving skills because a lot of them, they've always had the internet.
Yes.
So if you say to find something, it's not on the first page, they can't do it. And some of them can't even send emails, but they can make some incredible TikToks.
Really?
Oh my gosh, I said, send me an email and attach this. And they looked blank at me. How to do that? And I said, I've literally just seen that you've made this 3-minute TikTok video with perfect transitions, but you can't send an email.
Well, yeah, and I suppose that the email skill, if it is a skill, is going to be more important in a job than the TikTok skill, isn't it?
Well, it depends what you go into.
Of course, it depends what you go into, but generally speaking,
in general,
yeah, 44%. Okay, so how would you change the system briefly? You would want, because I don't know how you teach the things you're describing. I think this is why Michael Gove did what he did to education, because it's really easy to understand memorising stuff and accruing knowledge, and certainly when we were young, that was what was most rewarded. And I think Gove, like me, was someone who was quite good at it, so he rebuilt the education system essentially in his own image, but it's naffle use to a lot of people, and it's naffle use to the modern world. So how do you teach something like I don't know what the phrase I'm looking for is, like critical analysis or crunching knowledge crunching, actually using information rather than just collecting it?
Yeah, I think so. I've actually changed. I'm becoming head of life skills at a school now, and it's very focused. Is this, thank you, to help students be more prepared. Right. I think I do agree that GCSEs and A-levels should be changed. There's so much onus on if you're academic, then suddenly you're seen as better than. Right. I see so many students who give up saying, what's the point, miss? I can't get a 4 or 5 at maths or English. I'm useless. But actually, well, you're amazing at sport, you're amazing at music, you're amazing at art. So I think what they should do is have it equally, if you're academic or more practical, this should all be seen on their level playing field, because there was a report the other day, there's a shortage of people in, say, practical skills in the theatre and sound engineers. Okay. So why aren't we helping with that as well?
It's not something that would ever come up at school. Finally, Tasha, you can't sit and examine life skills, can you? So how do you measure the success of your new department?
Well, that is the thing I'm meant to be working on now, James, but I've called you instead.
What an appalling example to your... Get back to work this minute, miss. It's 29 minutes after 10. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. That's a question I'll put to everybody then. I'll put it to you. How do you measure? That's the thing. There it is. We got there. It's only half past. The attraction of the Michael Gove model is measurement. It is easily measured. It's the metric. It's a grade. It's a number. It's a target. It's a box that's either ticked or not ticked. Employers need something a little more intangible, a little less metrical. Is metrical a word, Keith? It is now. And so how do you measure that? How do you judge whether or not someone is going to be good at, for example, customer service in a school-based environment? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Dominic Ellis is here now with your headlines. 10:33 is the time. A-levels and GCSE. I'm so pleased. Thank you for helping me do this the right way round instead of how I would have done it once, which would be, why are young people today so rubbish at everything? It's not about that. And they're not. And I'm not turning... I must get that Thucydides quote, actually. I'll dig that out for you. I think that's just what we need at the moment. So it's about them being let down by the educational system in the context of being prepared for work. But my then fear becomes the importance of guarding against making everything about education commoditised or monetised or linked to employment and wages. Most of the things I learnt at school that I value most as an adult, most of the things that I learnt in lessons at school that I value most as an adult have not been much use to me career-wise. I think it's fair to say. John's in Leeds. John, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi. Good morning, James.
Hello, John.
Morning. I just want to say, I think I agree quite a lot with your last two callers, really. For me, it's not so much, education shouldn't so much be about memorising things. Not that there's not a place for it. But it really should be about trying to foster a love of learning, really. Get people to understand what they enjoy, what they like to do. And if you have that attitude, frankly, with the modern world and modern resources that you've got now, learning outside of school, etc., I think people will be much better prepared for the world.
How do you do that in a school? How do you do that? Well, if you've got 30 kids in your class and they're all liking different things, how do you how do you construct an educational system that helps them all explore the things that they particularly enjoy?
I know, it's one of those things, it's great in theory, isn't it?
Yes.
It is true. And I do have experience. And I actually have real experience of that. I was a primary school teacher for 6 months for my sins some years ago.
6 months?
Some years.
What happened? Did it just not agree with you?
It did not. No,
I'm sorry to hear that.
My problem is, I'm much more of a teacher. I'm a terrible manager. I've discovered when it comes to managing behaviour, and I sympathise.
You mean crowd control?
That too, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that I'd be much cop at that. I always had an image of myself like Robin Williams in Dead Poets Society, but I think, like you say, I'd be like an out of control fire extinguisher trying to calm the class down. It's an absolute shocker.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing is, it is incredibly difficult. I do empathise because, especially at primary level, just to give a brief aside, you're trying to design lessons almost from scratch because there's no common resources generally or anything like that. And you have to cater for children who are above their level. And you also have to cater for children who can't even read in year 6.
Yeah, that's precisely my point. I mean, that's impossible to do, surely, really, or at least very difficult.
It is at some stage. I mean, that's why you should probably, what I'm advocating is probably more at the secondary level than the primary level. And it's a case of just trying to help children, I don't like the term, but I'll use it, lean in to their strengths as much as they can alongside the learning the basics.
And you understand, as I do, the importance of actually detail here and describing exactly what it is, because the reason why you don't like phrases like lean in is because once they get put through the mangle of the Daily Mail and that mode of thinking or that mode of politics, anything that isn't immediately measurable and easily understood gets filed under wishy-washy or sort of meaningless. And that's not what's happening here. What's happening here is that it's very, very easy to test you on your Latin grammar or to give you marks out of 10 for your quadratic equations. It's not so easy to measure skills that might be more applicable to the workplace or skills that are not going to be consistent across a classroom. And that, I think, is at the heart of what the GCSE and A-level criticism Tony Blair has indulged in today addresses. Thank you, John. Beth's in Folkestone. Beth, what would you like to say?
Hey, James. So nice to speak to you.
Likewise. Thank you.
I feel like I could talk for hours about this, but
feel free.
I'm really
it's
happy.
10:37. I mean, you can give you till at least 10:45. Carry on.
Amazing. I'm so happy that I caught the end of the last caller because he just said something that really struck true, which is like love of learning is so important and self-directed learning. And so my background is I previously helped to set up and run an art school in the southeast of England, which was part of a further education college.
Yes.
And so we're that transition between school and workplace generally, or sometimes university. And so at the first part of the academic year, our kind of mission was about transitioning learners into being independent thinkers. And it kind of goes back, a lot of people were talking about in school, they have this banking model, it's called, which is this learning and regurgitating a correct and wrong way to answer things. And what that does is it gives no room for kind of critical thinking, holistic learning and synthesizing information. So our kind of mission, the first 3 to 4 months, we would give students like very tutor-led briefs and sessions, but within those kind of briefs, we would give them more and more increasing opportunities to kind of take their own independent choices about the kind of work they wanted to produce, how, the sources of information they were looking at.
Are you doing this from a standing start? I mean, these young people arriving without any of these attributes and skills because they've been so focused, so exclusively dedicated to retention and regurgitation?
I'd say a really large percentage of them. I mean, in further education...
That's just not right, is it? It's just not right.
You always get like a really broad spectrum. Of
course you do. I'm sorry.
People.
Of course you do. Yeah, I didn't mean to generalise.
So, no, it's fine. But I think, the skills within those individuals vary vastly. But something that's very common, and I think probably a lot of further education, especially arts education, people that are listening to this will feel as well, is that like critical thinking and independent learning is just not really built into them. And over the course of the year, the whole, as the year went on, the end of the year, they would have like a self-directed brief. So they write their own project. Every student's doing something completely different to one another. In one room at any time, I could have students doing like fashion, illustration, graphic design, architecture, photography, media, oil painting. And then your role as a tutor becomes more about kind of support and, you're there as a, how can I say it, like a
catalyst.
Now, but
a catalyst.
Yeah, to kind of support and develop each of those through like one-to-one tuition, through bringing in other group opportunities. But I think in a broader context, like this is what makes me so concerned about two things, which is one, this rhetoric from the government currently, which is about the underfunding of university courses that don't provide financial outcomes for students.
It's already happening, as you will know. Some courses are already closing down. Some of the humanities and arts courses at quite well-known universities are essentially withering on the vine.
Absolutely. And this has been going on for years, especially under Tory
yes, of course.
Tory government.
Well, because you can't, and it's
underfunding.
Because they can't put a price. If they can't put a price on it, it's that Oscar Wilde quote, isn't it, about knowing the cost of everything but the value of nothing. If they can't put the cost on it, it doesn't have a value to them. And that, I know it's a broad generalisation, and what what grinds my gears about it is the fact that they will often enjoy culture themselves, but they somehow don't see it as something that should be provided to the masses at the taxpayer's expense.
Totally. And then the question then is, how do you measure that?
I don't think you can,
you see. Students, I mean, there's already, I know from colleges, there's already data that is collected from students several months after they leave, which consists of phone calls and email. I've done it, of contacting ex-students and finding out where they are, and then being able to report on data of
but again, that's going to involve investment, application, man hours, and personnel, which in the current economic situation is unlikely to be improving or increasing at any time. Thank you, Beth. 10:41. I'm just coming out to 10:42 is the time. Steering it as well towards the employers and towards what it is, without being mean or rude, what it is that these young people don't have already when they're turning up for work that you would perhaps want them or even expect them to have in place. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. James, what a funny show. The example of your topic is the government themselves. Lots of qualifications, but absolutely no life experience and absolutely no common sense. Right, it's Nigel. I think projection is pretty much our national pastime at the moment, actually. I think I agree with Nigel. You see Jacob Rees-Mogg complaining that other people haven't got common sense, most infamously and despicably, of course, in the context of the Grenfell Tower tragedy. And you do sort of think of that old line about the best way to deal with people is to accuse them of being exactly what you are yourself, or to accuse them of doing exactly what you're doing yourself. It's coming up. It's just gone 10:42. Let's go to Hayley, who's in Martock in Somerset. Hayley, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. It's a couple of points that I had thinking about this. I was finding it kind of hard to package up as how do you teach these things? But the experience I have comes from my own company, recent new hires of students, and also from my mum as well. Actually, she's been hiring quite a lot recently. But for these reasons, I think from those two experiences, and I used to work in retail, and I think this is quite a common thing that's potentially got worse.
Yeah, go on.
It's just practicality, just basic things around communication.
Now, I recognise this, and I mean, I forget sometimes how long it is since I did anything else for a living. But retail was my thing for quite a long time. What's the link between school and that? You're talking about being affable, approachable, and proactive on the shop floor. How could schooling have diminished that ability? I don't quite see the link necessarily.
Yeah, I feel like there's room for how to be like a professional. I don't know, professionalism. Yeah. How to be a team player.
Yeah.
Maybe employers coming into schools and talking about, here's my dream employee. This is what they would do. This is how they would, conduct themselves. I would expect them to do these things. As in, if you're running late, let me know. If you're
Yes.
sick, you let me know. Because these are some of the things that I've experienced in the last 3 months. A hugely qualified young lady who we hired as an analyst,
right.
To do statistics and all kind of, wonderful number crunching. But honestly, as far as conducting herself in the workplace, it's been absolutely awful.
So on paper, she's a brilliant candidate.
Yeah.
Go on, sorry, I've interrupted you just as you're about to give me the juice.
Yeah, so, we gave her a project, completely briefed her on that project. Say in 4 days' time, let's get together and see how you're getting on. So I speak to her in 4 days' time. Oh, well, I was a bit stuck on this and I wasn't sure about that. And basically I've not really done any, and she hadn't really done anything. And in those 4 days, I'd not heard anything from her at all about that. She was sick. She didn't let anybody know. And then we sort of found out,
do you think that was?
I wasn't feeling well.
Well, I mean, there's always a danger of extrapolating too much from one example, but this seems but this seems to fit some broader parameters. Why do you think it is? What is it about the school system that has done this or contributed to what you describe?
As I say, I just think it's. I used to do a course in the secondary school actually called PSE, and I think it was more. It was personal social education, it was called.
Yeah.
I feel like there's room for something of that ilk, which is just that, rather than just learning. And look, the knowledge is great. If I take the lady that we just hired recently,
sure.
Her qualifications are outstanding. And she
that's naffle use if she's not doing the work.
Exactly.
I still have anxiety dreams about some of my early jobs and being frightened of being not found out necessarily, but of having forgotten about, suppose, more so my early days on newspapers than retail. But that's a really big change, isn't it, over the last 30 years? I don't want all young people to be terrified of their employers or terrified of their bosses, but you'd certainly want them to have a little bit more sense of concern that they should be doing the tasks that they've been tasked with doing. That's actually quite weird.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a little bit of a theory as well. I'm not a big fan of Twitter and social media.
Distraction, and all these things. Attention deficit, as it were.
I think honestly, that's the amount of time spent in social and chats and TikTok and all these kind of things. I think almost the reality of conducting yourself in a job
application. Well, I sometimes find I'm on holiday and I notice that I've been reading a book for 2 hours, which when I'm not on holiday, I haven't done because I've been checking Twitter every 20 minutes. At the moment, Keith is checking my Twitter every 15 minutes. He's getting very, very excited about the mounting numbers on there, but I'm very relaxed about it. But it is, what's the word? It's not fear of missing out necessarily. It's attention span. It's your attention span perhaps has got shorter because you're constantly checking on stuff. And that's, like over the years, they've said the same things about television, radio, video games, videos. So it will all come out in the wash, but just in the context of the now, that's got to be part of it. It's why I disagreed yesterday with some of the teachers saying that boys might do worse than girls in GCSEs this year. The gap is closing at A-levels because they spend more time on PlayStation. I think you're a bit out of touch there, lads. Certainly the teenage girls, and I have two, that I am aware of have got plenty of distractions, even if they're not playing Grand Theft Auto or Saints Row until the small hours of the morning. It's 10:48. It's 10 to 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the conversation about young people not being ready for work and not being prepared for work is a lot more interesting than it was back in the days when I would just give them all a coating for not being able to make eye contact or indulge in a firm handshake. Although those are pertinent, perhaps, problems, but it's not the young person's fault if they haven't been educated. That's the word, isn't it? In the importance of these things, these soft skills. So, even not being particularly fussed about getting tasks finished. What about that? Personal skills, that idea of the particularly customer-facing roles. You don't want somebody who is unaware of the importance of engaging. Some people, of course, are just too shy, but there'll be plenty of people who just haven't been educated in the importance of things and therefore aren't doing them. I don't know how much comes naturally. I don't know if anything comes naturally. You might be copying your parents. You've got a very outgoing mum or dad, and then you find yourself in, a customer-facing role. You just copy, you behave like your mum behaves, and you're charming and talkative to everybody. Or you might have really shy parents, in which case you don't know what to do when someone comes in and asks for help. Malcolm's in Grimsby. Malcolm, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Malcolm.
Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Welcome aboard.
And all that.
Thank you.
I'm interested to introduce the idea of informal education and youth work. We're talking a lot about formal education within the school setting.
Yes.
This kind of binary sense of have they passed or have they failed, and obviously you're talking about whether people are actually ready for the workplace.
Yes.
And informal education, especially within youth work has been massively on the decline in the last 15 years. It's been cut out of budget upon budget all over the place.
Of course it has, yeah.
But youth work provides the space, I think, for two things. For young people to engage with adults in a trusted environment, where you to actually build relationships with adults so that they see adults as people that they can trust, people who are there for them, who are standing with them. Simple things like learning conversations, having conversations around whether they've succeeded or whether they failed. But also within youth work, it provides the space for them to try stuff out, to mess up.
And what do we mean by youth work? We mean sort of clubs and after-school activities.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it's been moved to after-school activities, I think probably more to ensure that there's childcare so that people can put their kids into after-school activities in order to... But I
mean, obviously the grinding down of this and it would be austerity-based cuts, won't it, largely, originally, is awful. Libraries, similarly, would have had activities in them, and I think the Tories have shut about 800 libraries. But it's not either or. There's no... Just because it might have previously been provided through youth work doesn't mean, and this is probably part of what Tony Blair is proposing, it doesn't mean it can't actually be provided in school, in classrooms. The same things you describe could be part of a more formal curriculum as opposed to the denuded and diminished youth work sector that you're describing, couldn't it?
Potentially. Whether teachers have got time to do all that kind of stuff, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I think there's a real important...
Well, that's why they need to spend less time doing the retention and regurgitation and a little bit more time doing what would be traditionally described as youth work, perhaps. Just a thought.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that teachers used to be automatically qualified as youth workers before the professionalisation of youth work.
Is that right?
Interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting sideline. But I think there's an important part of youth work that's about voluntary participation, that the young people are choosing to engage within youth work.
Yeah.
But I think it is after-school clubs, it's evening stuff, it's residentials, it's taking kids into situations where they're completely out of their comfort zones. But importantly, they've got the space to fail, but they've also got the space to learn through that failure as well.
So,
whereas
I mean, it's not giving them a rounded grounding or education, whatever you want to call it, and then complaining that they're not rounded. That's what we're doing to them, isn't it, at the moment? That's what that's taking away the breadth of experience and input, reducing the breadth of experience and input, and then complaining about their lack of experience and output.
Yeah, and you how do we measure whether...
Phone line's gone. I don't know why. Phone line's gone. I don't know. Something in the air in Grimsby. Thank you, Malcolm. You got a lot of good points across. I mean, obviously, if I'm speaking about your generation, with 5 minutes to go on this topic, it's a little late to invite you to come to the 5 minutes to go on a full switchboard. It'd be great for you to contribute if you are a relatively recent school leaver and you were somewhat surprised when you got into the workplace to find out that you didn't have the skills. I mean, you may well have found it relatively easy to accrue them, to attain them, but you felt a bit let down by your schooling when you got into the workplace. 0345 6060 973. If you quit, you can have Malcolm's phone line. Liam's in Haringey. Liam, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome. What's on
So I'm a primary school teacher at the moment, and I studied education studies at university. And I think really my main argument was that the state education system has sort of always existed to suit the economic needs. You know, ever since the sort of Victorian period, it was there for children to assimilate into society and culture. And I think where we're facing a real difficult point at the moment is that society has really dramatically changed in the last few decades. You know, you think of climate change, you think of internet usage, things like TikTok, social media. So I think really we're dealing with an education system that is so outdated that it's, you know, the teachers are sort of trying to navigate contemporary culture without really having the tools to do that.
I think this is pretty much what Tony Blair is talking about, isn't it? I think he recognises what for you is a matter of experience and for him is a matter of observation. So you would replace the current examination systems with a new qualification that would involve rigorous forms of continuous assessment of pupils between the ages of 16 and 18 and inform their education choices and hold schools to account rather than sticking them all on a conveyor belt, which is cutting them into shapes that are increasingly less relevant to the world they're going to arrive in.
Exactly. And just quickly, I think that's a really interesting point about Tony Blair as well, because my argument also is like, whose debate is this? Because if you look at the percentage of teachers, and 86.9%, I think it is, are white British.
Right.
You know, in order to really create change in our education system, we need people from other backgrounds, other ethnicities. We need more inclusion. Yeah. Because this argument about a society we're trying to create, you know, whose society is it, and from what ethnical background are we really representing as well? So when we talk about culture, you know, we need to include not just the white British culture, we need perspectives from all backgrounds. So I think that's what we're missing as well.
But it's so self-evident, isn't it? And yet I think that what you just did was woke, saying something blindingly obvious and to the benefit of everybody, for the good of the whole country, but it involves acknowledging that the way we used to do things can be improved, and that, of course, is kryptonite to parts of the population. Have you seen the Argos story? Have you seen the Argos story? Have you seen it?
No, I haven't, no.
Oh, God, you're in for a treat there. So you're about to make an important point, and I cut you off in your prime. Make it briefly, if you would.
No, sorry, I was just briefly going to say, and I think this is where the critical thinking skills comes from, you know. I came from a working class background, and I wasn't educated that well, and I wasn't reading until I was 22, and then I went to university in London, developed these critical thinking skills, and those opportunities were there for me, but they can easily become available for people from all sorts of walks in life and backgrounds, and I think that's where we need to really develop a more inclusive society and make critical thinking skills available to everyone.
And I worry the direction of political traffic at the moment, and it may be about to undertake a screeching lurch, I don't know, but the direction of political traffic at the moment is not the one that you describe or the one that you're calling for. Liz Truss, for example, doesn't strike me as someone who is interested in the potential of young people to flourish and grow and blossom and bloom in all manners of experience and existence. She strikes me very much as someone who sees human beings as a crop which is sort of harvested largely on behalf of the kind of people that fund her kind of politics. But hey-ho, hopefully we're a little bit wrong about that. It's coming up to 11 o'clock. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Up next, calls for families hosting Ukrainian refugees to have their allowances doubled. 3 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Actually, I'd just like change of mind, quite a big change of mind. We'll keep that Ukrainian story in reserve. This is a plea from Lord Harrington. But I think, you know what happens when I do this, don't you? He's a minister in the current government. Every time, I'm going to use a phrase that really doesn't get used in real life, except if you're listening to an audio book of Jeeves and Wooster or something like that. He seems, whenever I suggest that a member of the government, the Conservative government, is a good egg, it all goes horribly wrong. Hey, here we go. I end up with egg on my face. So, I mean, a short list of Conservative ministers that I have cautiously had warm words for in recent years would include Michael Gove, Matt Hancock, and Nadeem Zahawi. Exactly. And at the time of me saying relatively warm things, they were just about justifiable or justified. So I hesitate to do it. I actually got a message off a former Conservative minister who may well return to office at some point in the future, asking me never to praise them on the radio. So the curse of O'Brien has actually reached Conservative quarters. So I apologise in advance to Lord Harrington, but he seems to be quite a good egg. He's the immigration minister, and I'm pretty sure he had some fairly strong words to say about the Rwandan scheme as well. But he's now called for monthly payments to families hosting Ukrainian refugees to double, not least because of the cost of living crisis being on the horizon. So I'm going to keep that in reserve. It's something that we'll definitely talk about this week. And if you're in that category, then give me a call at some point. Well, no, don't give me a call. Just keep your ears open, because we'll be returning to it between now and the end of the week. Because I think our attention is drawn inexorably to news from the English Channel, where almost 1,300 people made that crossing in a single day yesterday, which rather suggests the deterrent nature of the Rwandan proposal is not working terribly well. And I mean, it was so bizarre, the politics of that Rwandan debacle, wasn't it? Because they were simultaneously trying to argue that it would be a deterrent, i.e. it would prevent people from trying to come to the United Kingdom, but also that it wasn't in any way a punishment or a negative to be deported to the middle of Africa, even though your reasons for coming to the United Kingdom would probably have included some form of family or filial friendship connection and an ability to speak the language. So how could it be a deterrent, but also something that shouldn't be looked at as a punishment or a negative? The fundamental logical flaw at the heart of it, of course, was the inability of the government to say that they're racist, or at least that they're appealing to racists. We love this scheme because, of course, it's a punishment. Of course, getting sent to Rwanda is, a punishment. Of course, it's a negative. Of course, it's a destination devoutly to be feared. But we can't say that out loud. We're just going to tap our nose. We're going to blow our dog whistle. And this is designed to appeal to people who love the idea of human beings crossing the English Channel in small boats being deported to Rwanda. But I'm the Home Secretary. I can't actually come out and say it. The worse we treat these people, the more popular this policy becomes among our base. There it is. I got there in the end. The worse we treat these people. So they were simultaneously trying to claim that it would be a deterrent, but also that it wasn't mistreating people. It wasn't treating people badly. How does that work? Just pause. Look, even if you're a massive gammon, all right, and you're already spitting your shredded wheat all over the dashboard of your car, all right, just pause for a minute and think how stupid they think you must be. In your case, possibly justifiably, to tell you it's a deterrent, it's a massive deterrent, but also it's not mistreating anybody in any way whatsoever. Yeah, of course, they didn't think you were stupid. They knew that you love the idea of people being mistreated. The worse it is, the further away it is, the worse the human rights record, the more the people that Priti Patel was appealing to would actually love it. They'd love it. Love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. It's fantastic. Stick them in a big hole in the middle of Africa. And that's, yes, because I hate them. I hate these people in these boats because I listen to Nigel Farage and I read the Daily Mail and I despise them. And I'm not ready yet to wonder what it is that's happened inside me to curdle my soul to such a degree that I can think so vilely of fellow human beings. I'll just keep waving my little Farage flag and buying the Daily Mail. So that's what it was designed to do. It was designed to appease and appeal to people who love the idea of treating these asylum seekers appallingly. And that's why it failed, because they couldn't say that out loud. Out loud, they had to say, well, I don't know what people are complaining about. Rwanda is a lovely part of the world. I don't. And then you realise that even people quite high up in government, you realise that even people who were household name politicians had somehow arrived at the conclusion that it was only going to be a form of holding. It was only going to be a form of process. And that if your application was approved while you were in Rwanda, then you'd be flown straight back again. Which is just not true. It wasn't even that. If you turned out to be a genuine refugee fleeing from famine, war, pestilence, or Vladimir Putin, then and you were found to be in that category, then good old Brexit Britain was going to invite you to stay in Rwanda for the rest of your life. That is what the policy was. And of course, I mean, people listening to this programme fall into two categories. They divide into two categories. It is either... well, so what? It's not our problem. What do you think we're going to do with all these people? Where are they all going to live? And no one ever looks back over the last God knows how many decades and realises those questions are answered every day. Those questions are answered every day. The people you see sleeping in doorways, the poor souls in this country who are truly homeless through substance abuse or other appalling experiences, are largely not these people. Our society absorbs them. Fewer, sadly, than other comparable economies, much, much fewer than other European countries, fewer than France, fewer than Germany, although, of course, the racist lies don't tell you that either. And then there is this notion of illegal asylum seekers. There's no such thing. There's no such thing. We've closed down all the routes that you can take to come to this country. All the routes that you can cut safely that you can use to come to this country. So we've only left the unsafe route, which is to get in a dinghy, hand over your life savings to some scumbag gangster and cross your fingers and hope for the best. That's why it happens. That's why the numbers are going up. It's a consequence of deliberate government policy. Incredible, right? And then the people who supported the government because the government promised to, control our borders, are complaining about a consequence of their policy. You process these people and find out whether or not they are genuine asylum seekers or not. But until that process is complete, there is no illegality involved. Except, of course, the confected notion of we've made it impossible to come here through safe routes, and if you use an unsafe route, then you're breaking the law. So that question there in the news, that question there in the bulletin, about the system so obviously failing is not a question anybody's particularly interested in answering. The more money you make, the more profile you make out of the Channel Crossings crisis, the less interested you really are in a solution. Come here a minute. This is really important. No one else really tells you this. The bigger... Look at Farage now, desperately trying to claw back some form of relevance by heading down to Dover with his Fisher-Price binoculars and rubbing his thighs, watching people who are quite possibly going to drown if they don't get picked up quickly. That's him. He's in clover. He's like a pig in shocking amounts of sewage. He loves it. Why does he love it so much? You think he cares about you? All he cares about is getting some clicks and likes on Twitter, getting his face back in the news. This is the man that brought you Brexit, right? Brought you Brexit with a promise that it would reduce the number of foreigners in this country. I'm not suggesting that everyone who voted for Brexit was a racist, but everyone who admires Nigel Farage is almost definitely a massive racist, by definition. Immigration's gone up since Brexit happened. And not just gone up, it's gone up in the countries where brown people come from. That's what he sold you, okay? I'm cool with it. You should be furious because you voted for it in order to reduce the numbers of these people coming here legally or, quotes, illegally. And now he's desperately trying to get his face back in the news by banging on about the fact that things have actually got worse since you bought from him the solution to the problem that has actually got bigger. So he's not interested in coming up with a proper solution to it. The people who are interested in coming up with a proper solution to it are the people who recognise the basic humanity of the people in the boats, because a proper solution is going to involve cooperation with our colleagues. Brexit made it worse. You know that, right? You know there was a treaty under which if someone's application was rejected, they could be sent back to the country that they'd come from or a country that they'd been registered in. You know that, right? Brexit actually made it worse. It pulled us out of the Dublin Treaty. Did you read that in the Daily Mail? Do you get that off Farage? No, of course you don't, because they're not interested in solutions. They're interested only in making you angrier and more full of hate and more full of bitterness, directed at truly, truly desperate people. Which is why I never talk about it. Because the people who really want to fix the problem are the people who care about the refugees and the asylum seekers. And they even are such woke lefties that if someone is applying falsely, if someone is coming here solely to make a better life, not to flee torture and bloodshed, war and pestilence, but to hope that they can, work 50 hours a week and build a decent life for themselves and their family, a so-called economic migrant, they don't want them to die either. They don't want them to suffer either. It's such a weird worldview to have a look at 100 fellow human beings, or in this case, 1,295 fellow human beings, and think, God, I really don't want them to die or suffer horribly. And of course, the people who do want them to die or suffer horribly are the people who pretend to be opposed to these crossings, while secretly they absolutely love them, rubbing their thighs while they look through their Fisher-Price binoculars. They love it. The bigger the numbers, the more attention they get. The bigger the numbers, the more relevance they can accrue. The more newspaper inches they can get paid to produce. So who do you go to? Who actually wants to make it better? 0345 6060 973. What does a better solution look like? You can only answer this question if you actually care about these people, which excludes almost everybody who traditionally rings a radio phone-in programme to talk about people crossing the English Channel in unsafe dinghies, having handed their life savings over to scumbag gangsters. Because you don't care about these people. The government had to pretend somehow that you did while feeding you the lovely Rwandan red meat that would allow you to rub your hands with glee at the thought of them suffering. The more suffering we can inflict on these people, the more popular the policy will be. Let's send them all to Rwanda. Well, that's working out really well for you, because yesterday was the biggest day ever for channel crossings. So what does an actual solution look like? You're not going to get an answer from Priti Patel. You're not going to get an answer from Liz Truss or Nigel Farage. You're not going to get an answer from any of the people grown fat upon the fury of people, conditioned to hate and fear these desperate human beings. Oh, I found one who doesn't deserve your sympathy. Well, let's stone all 2,000 of them then. I found one who's committed a crime. Well, let's let them all drown then. Because that's how we treat humans, right? You find one Capricorn who's a murderer, then you round up all the Capricorns and send them to Rwanda. It's madness. It's inhuman. It's disgusting. It's unchristian, or whatever God it is you believe in. But my God, it's good for business, isn't it? Entire television networks now built upon the hatred of foreigners. Fox News in America, whatever it's called over here. Incredible business to be done. Huge fortunes to be made by people who are already minted. And what did they make their money out of? Making you angrier and more frightened of people so far below you on the socio-economic food chain that you... You don't even know that they exist until they appear on your television screens and in your news bulletins. So, at 17 minutes after 11, with the simple proviso that the 1,300 people who crossed the English Channel yesterday are human beings as deserving of dignity and decency as you are, so you can only ring me if you think that their humanity is equal to yours, how do we address this issue? And is it even a problem? 0345 6060 973. These are really simple questions, but I'm afraid that there is one qualification you need to answer them, and that is a simple acceptance in your heart and in your head that that human being in that dinghy over there is worth every bit as much as you are. And if you can't, I'm afraid, look yourself in the eye and say, yes, there, but for the grace of God go I, then you're never going to be part of the solution. You're only ever going to be part of the problem, and you're such a silly sausage, you haven't even managed to get yourself into a position where you get paid for it, like all your heroes do. It's 11:18. I've done it again. I could have got it all into a sentence, and instead I went off on a 16-minute meander. So how are we ever going to help the people crossing the channel in unsafe dinghies if right-wing media, which dominates the British landscape, and right-wing politicians who've been in government now for 12 years, edging ever further to the right, constantly compete to come up with the most brutal ways of treating these human beings? How, if you see it as a problem, and I understand why many people do, I'm never unaware of my privilege, and if you genuinely see it as a problem, if you really think they're nicking your biscuits, then how are we ever going to solve the problem while the conversation is dominated by people competing to come up with the vilest, most disgusting ways of treating these largely desperate people? 21 minutes after 11 is the time. And the latest tactic is to talk about all the Albanian men who are coming over because they couldn't possibly be fleeing famine or pestilence or war. But, of course, they're often going to be victims of people trafficking. They're being brought over here to work in the hidden economy, to work in the corners of the country where they won't get any protections at all. They won't get any rights. They won't get looked after at all. So they are victims too. They may not be bona fide refugees or asylum seekers, but they are likely to be victims too. So how are you ever going to fix this problem while the conversation is dominated by people who hate the victims of these crimes? 0345 6060 973. And I'll tell you what happens when letting the people who hate the victims of these crimes reaches its apotheosis. I'll tell you exactly what happens. The Rwanda plan, which has worked out so well that we're now seeing more people cross the English Channel in dinghies than we ever have before. Cindy's in Chiswick. Cindy, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Yeah, I was just speaking to one of your researchers there. My son went to a local primary school, and like I said, kids don't see colour, kids don't see race, religion, nothing. Kids see a friend.
Not until they're taught to.
Yeah. And so my son met this little boy, and I introduced myself to his mum. His mum was Syrian. Yes. And English wasn't her first language, but you know what? She was new, and I wanted her to feel welcome, and we kind of sort of got by. Anyway, 3 years later, they came here. I don't like the word illegally, but they came here for safety. They came here because they wanted to build a life for themselves and for their children. And
don't need illegally or an illegally. They came here via the only means they could.
Necessary, yeah. And I was always brought up to treat people equally. Anyway, so we developed this relationship with this family, and like I said, English. She was going to English school to study English, and the father is still working 60 hours a week, pot washing, right. And I can honestly say they are the nicest, most sincere, most loving friends that I've come across. And James, there's no bitterness. There's no hatred in the heart. There's no this person doesn't. They see everyone as equal. And when I talk to people, you're only coming over here to. But a lot of these families are doing the jobs that most people don't want to do.
Well, then, I mean, that's only when they're allowed to do the jobs. I think it's £8 a week that you get while you're not allowed to work, and your application is being processed. £8 a week to cover things like medicines and sanitary products.
Yeah, it's like I said, when I see these two little boys, we're all parents, James. And when you see these children and the love that they have, they sit and cuddle with their mum and dad, and they're both in secondary school now. The little boy and my son, and they call me auntie, and my son calls their mum and dad auntie and uncle. My son is learning Arabic with them, and my son will go and he's learning the Quran, and he'll sit and pray, and I'll go and sit and pray with the mother, because it's respect.
Yes. Here's the thing. Here's the thing. And some of the people that you're speaking to and speaking with who are a little shocked by it or have been groomed and gaslit into positions of negativity, they're victims as well. That hatred. They were young once. They were children once who could have been friends with the little Syrian boy in their class, but they got led down different paths. It's important to remember that you got lucky. Think of any group of 30 parents in a primary school class. Some of them are going to be lovely, some of them aren't. And on this occasion, you got the double bubble of meeting a refugee family who also turned out to be lovely. But in the same way that there'll be people living on your street who are lovely and not lovely, there'll be some people who've come here via the same route who you wouldn't get on as well with and who wouldn't be lovely. And there'll be some who actually may be criminals, potentially. But that's true of any collection of human beings, anywhere you go. In fact, the desperation that must have been in place to make these perilous journeys, I would argue, is probably a more reliable indicator of contribution to the society that you end up feeling safe in than being born in it. But, you know, these are steep mountains to climb. What?
You know what, though, James?
Go on.
James, I tell you what, my dad, I come from a mixed heritage. So
yes.
My dad's West Indian and my late mum was Irish.
Right.
So when they came over to England, they faced, you know, no blacks, no Irish and no dogs.
Yes.
My dad is now 83. I'd like to think of my dad as a kind of liberal thinker to a point.
Mm.
But when I said to him, my dad's now in a care home, and I showed him a picture of my son and his two little Syrian friends reciting the Quran and doing their prayers and just being children. And my dad's reaction was, they're going to convert him. I said, convert him to what, Dad?
Oh.
No. He said, I said, Dad, I said, get a grip of, you know, and that's most people's attitude. You know, you see it on Twitter. Yeah. Oh, you have them in your house then.
Yeah.
You know, you know, it's where does this? And I like to think my dad's not an ignorant person. My
but where's he get? I mean, where over the last? If he's 83, over the last 40 years, everywhere he turns, Cindy, the poison is being sold. It's being peddled. It's been poured into his ears and poured down everywhere he turns. It's one of those stories where the further away you are from the news, the easier it will be to hang on to your decency. So, you know, my catchphrase at times like this is contempt for the con men, compassion for the conned, and finding one example of a young British boy who has converted to Islam or converted to Christianity or converted to Hinduism or whatever it may be is not evidence of the phenomenon that your poor old man is frightened of. At least he's got you trying to offer up some form of antidote. But the poison is everywhere. I mean, it's absolutely everywhere. The only mystery, the only question is when you encounter it, whether it's someone who actually gets rich off the back of it or just gets frightened and angry off the back of it, because one of those people is the con man and the other one is the conned. Jerry's in Full Sutton in Yorkshire. Thank you, Cindy. Jerry, what would you like to say? Jerry? 28 minutes after 11 is the time. I can hear him, but he can't hear me, which is not exactly how radio is supposed to work. We'll try and sort that phone line out shortly. Tony's in Chingford. Tony, how are we going to fix this? How are we actually going to improve this situation if indeed it is a problem that needs fixing?
Hello.
Hello, Tony.
I think we need to depoliticise it nationally, and probably a bit of a pie in the sky idea, but look, there should be an international agreement based on how many numbers every nation takes, and then we'll move all this out of the arena of Westminster and put it into a...
Would that work, do you think? Because I agree with you. I had two theories when I'm at my most idealistic. I'd like to do genealogy tests for everybody so that they can see where they really come from. And then you would have some form of international cooperation doing a sort of per capita or with a bit of socioeconomic twiddling. But I think people would ignore it. I mean, the countries that take in by far the most refugees are in the Middle East, next door to the countries where the bombs are dropping and where the famines are taking place. We take in percentage terms, fewer than our European neighbours do. And yet everybody who has a fit of the vapours when figures like today's are released are convinced that this country does way more than anyone else. So I don't know if it would work even if you could give them the numbers, Tony.
Yeah, I agree with that, but that's based on the situation as it's read now.
Yes.
This pseudo-organisation I'm thinking of, if that's our requirement, if that's us taking on our, part of this burden, if you want to call it that, then that will remove it from... Basically, I want to get it out of the political arena. I want to get it out of the Daily Mail. I want to make it a number.
You can't. Look how much money they make out of it. Look, Nigel Farage's entire life is built upon demonising refugees and demonising people fleeing other countries. It's his life. It's literally who he is. With his disgusting posters.
That's a good reason to do it, isn't it?
Well, yeah, of course, but that's why you can never detoxify. You can never, it would be like asking drug dealers to stop dealing drugs, as opposed to putting measures in place that prevent them from dealing drugs, or finding a way to accommodate the fact that people are going to take drugs without upsetting everybody else. It's just nuts. And that's the question. There it is. How would you fix this problem? Working from the first principle that little boy or that grown man or that woman their life is worth as much as yours is. That's the first principle, because every single conversation I ever encounter outside of this studio, pretty much, and one or two colleagues as well, but apart from us, every conversation I encounter starts from a position that they are inferior to you. And there are politicians and pundits in this country whose entire career depends upon their sly ability to wink at you and let you know that they agree without ever quite saying it out loud. Talk about, people speaking foreign on trains, or the difference, or Romania, you wouldn't want to live next door. They're just telling you that they believe in what is essentially a Nazi hierarchy of humanity. But you don't have to believe in it. And if you stop believing in it, then maybe we can start finding ways of reducing or addressing this issue. Dominic Ellis is here now with your headlines. It's 11:34. I'll tell you something else as well. I'll tell you what the real problem is, the fundamental problem at the heart of the right-wing media and right-wing politics, very deliberate obsession with immigration, particularly refugee and asylum seeking. It's that the percentage of people who get here whose applications are approved is actually really high. So the massive majority, or a significant majority, of the people coming here are all of the things that the racist politicians pretend to be comfortable with. The genuine refugee, the genuine asylum seeker. The approval rates for the people who actually manage to get here are so high that they're never going to be able to appease their racist base unless they can do one of two things. Actually close down routes into this country, which they've done so successfully that the only route left is a leaky dinghy being presided over by a blood-sucking gangster. So this is the policy. Close down all of the routes, get as few people coming here as possible. That's been so successful that the only route left is the death trap dinghy. All right? And then option number two is, even if they are successful in their application, we've got to find a way not to actually look after them. And this is where the Rwanda thing tied itself in knots, because they can't say it out loud. That's why so many people, including Conservative MPs, ended up thinking, because they were supposed to think, that if the application was successful, you'd come back from Rwanda. That wasn't the policy. How are you going to get the numbers down if the majority of people who manage to get here are bona fide, genuine asylum seekers, genuine refugees? Because not yet. I imagine Donald Trump's gone there, but we haven't gone there yet in this country, where you'll have a public figure either from the toxic media or from the toxic Tory wing of the Tory party. No one's going to stand up and say, I don't care if they are genuine refugees from genuine war zones. I still want to treat them like scum. No one's going to quite go there yet, although I wouldn't bet against it happening. So what are they left with? You close down the routes into the country so completely that all that's left is the death trap dinghy. But still, the majority of people who are getting into the country are going to have their applications approved. So what are you going to do? Well, you've got to find a way of getting rid of the people who have had their applications approved. The genuine refugee, the one you're pretending publicly to actually be comfortable with. And that's where the Rwanda plan comes from, and that's why it fell apart. There it is. I mean, it's like shooting fish in a barrel understanding this stuff, and yet it still apparently eludes huge swathes of the right-wing media and the entire cabinet. 11:37 is the time. Jerry is in Full Sutton in Yorkshire. Jerry, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, Jerry.
Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
There seems to be a very easy join-the-dots puzzle here.
Go on.
We've got a lot of people who want to come to this country. We've got a lot of gaps in the labour market, and not just to remove the fruit that's rotting in the fields.
No.
But I've lost count of the times I've taken an Uber or a taxi, and I've got chatting to the driver, and I find out he's a doctor.
Yeah.
He's a university lecturer.
Bầu trời chiều không màu nắng ấm, thầm thầm buồn vọng nhớ về đường phương xa ai nào hay biết